It's the morning drive.
Good morning, and welcome to the Morning Drive. I'm your host, Brooks Fiesinger of BrooksFiesinger.com and MillionaireWho.com, where we help you stabilize your wallet, secure your future, and succeed in entrepreneurship and finance. Today we've got three things on the docket today. We're going to be talking about moving from video into podcast syndication. I'll be talking about my worst investment and my worst business ever. I'm going to be really forthcoming and talk about that for a little while, so hopefully you find that very interesting. We like to talk about successes. We also got to talk about our big failures. And then I'll briefly discuss the book, The Power of Habit. All right, let's get on the road. I'm here with my co-host today, Hyundai Sonata. All right. The first thing I wanted to mention today is that I am going to actively be moving from video only to audio and video. Right, I'll continue doing these videos, but going to audio means I'll be syndicated across multiple places, including Stitcher and iTunes and whatnot, and that should be good for a lot of people. Hopefully, it'll make it a little easier to find me, a little easier to listen to me at your convenience, and not just in the location that's most convenient for me. So hopefully you find that very pleasant. Now, for those of you who are tuning in using an audio mechanism, I've got to give you the warning. That means any re-syndicated versions of this show that you've watched before here were primarily designed for video. And in designing them for video, I want to make sure I warn you that I might reference something that you cannot see, and I do apologize for that. Once again, I'm now cognizant of that. I was not cognizant of that initially, since that was not my goal or my approach. So once again, hopefully that's awesome. Some of the things that I've got to do in order to tweak it for this syndication purpose is I am going to shorten the intro. So you probably heard an even shorter intro, even though I had already shortened it from the long intro that I had originally. Once again, it's still probably too long. Some of you are going to look and say, hey, I've got a degree in broadcast and your video entrance is too long. Yep, I expect that. But, you know, I like music and I like my little intro. So for now, it will stand until somebody is persuasive enough to convince me to shorten it even further. All right. So this is certainly exciting. Hopefully, it makes it easier for you and others to access it. And I'm sure some of you are going to switch because these videos have been so awful lately because the blasted sun is destroying the picture. I can't figure out a way around it. No matter what time I leave in the morning, just to where the sun's rising right now, it's showing up right in my face. So once again, I apologize for that, but I can't figure out a way around it. I try to leave 30 minutes early and the sun's still in my face. I leave 30 minutes later and the sun's still in my face. So as said, the only other option would be to stop doing the morning drive. But that defeats the purpose of the morning drive, right? I know some people are like, hey, you got to do whatever it takes for the perfect quality video. And I kind of agree. But then this is also, like, if you don't understand the premise of why I do the morning drive, go listen to some of the earlier podcasts. The first ones I discuss why the morning drive is the morning drive, why I do it when I do, why I do it how I do. There is a reason for it. It is not because I am just sticking to irrational principles. That doesn't mean they're always totally rational, but doesn't mean they're totally irrational either. So once again, go listen to those early podcasts. You can understand why I do this, why we do it the way that we do. And for those of you who are just joining me now on podcast syndication via one of those other podcast mechanisms, welcome. I really appreciate you joining us today. Hopefully you take away a lot from these podcasts and these conversations. They're a little different than some other podcasts. Once again, I have been a college professor for many years. I am also a business owner. I am also a employee. I am also an inventor. I am also an author. I am also a jack of all trades in some ways. I've done a whole bunch of different things. I've done real estate. I've done investing. I've done as to the businesses. I've done a whole bunch of this stuff. So I can speak both from experience, but then I also have the ability to talk from the academic point of view based on those experiences as a college professor for many years. And so hopefully you find that perspective beneficial and very interesting. All right. So that's not what you signed up for today. You didn't join us to hear me talk about me moving from video to syndication, right? Yeah, you don't care. Unless it makes it easier for you to get it. Hopefully you care about that. What you probably are going to care about is the next topic, which is my absolute worst investment when I got, when I lost big time, when I lost a massive amount of money. Why? What? How did it come about? And what can you learn about so you don't do the same thing, right? That's what's important about this. Now, I think it's always important to learn from other people's experiences, and so I'm hoping that you can learn from mine, and therefore you don't also lose a large portion of your life savings over a product or a initiative that's destined to fail. All right, so the business that I'm talking about, which is also a product, which is also a patented product, by the way, so I've gotten the patent for it, is something called Active Word Fonts. Now, I'm going to walk into this a little slowly so you can understand how Active Word Fonts came around and why I dumped all my money into it. So Active Word Fonts has a fairly normal story as far as how inventions happen and how things happen. I'm sitting there in a collegiate classroom taking a class on graphic design, specifically typography. So I'm taking this class about typography, and I had a unique background. A lot of students in my class were art majors. They had a background specifically in art. They were focusing just on art. I, on the other hand, am the crazy guy who's like an engineer who does leadership and business and then also takes art classes. I've taken extensive coursework in things that seem really odd to many people, like videography and audio development and web development and graphic design and a bunch of things. So I have a bunch of concentrations, I have a bunch of majors, I have a bunch of random things that I've learned about. And so I'm literally taking this class in graphic design, and that gives me a unique background. So I feel like I approach things very differently than some other people in my class. And so one of the things that came up was the history of typography. And the history of typography to me was kind of humorous. And the reason why I say it was humorous is because, we're sitting there learning, and it just like ends in the 80s. It's like, hey, here, so much stuff has happened in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Oh, isn't this great? And then it just dies, right? I'm like, die. It doesn't even make sense. So I went and talked to my professor later, and I said, hey, why aren't we talking about a active type of typography that uses the power of computers to manipulate text to make it easier to read, right? That seemed obvious to me. It seemed to me that, everybody in the world should have been doing this, and I just thought the professor should be talking about it, right? I mean, if this is the big deal, why is the professor leaving the most important part of typography out? So I was kind of frustrated at first that my professor wasn't talking about this thing at all. And then he kind of looks at me like I'm an idiot, and he's like pretty much saying, what are you talking about? And that's when I first realized that what seemed like the logical next step in typography evolution, according to my teacher, did not actually exist. So this is a big deal from an invention standpoint, because this is the way a lot of inventors come about talking about an invention. It seems like something that makes a lot of sense based on the things that they're doing, and they're surprised it does not already exist. You see that song? That sounds driving me nuts. Something that doesn't already exist. Since it didn't exist and it seemed like it needed to exist, I decided I had to create it, right? And so this is where, the actual invention comes from. Now, when I tried to realize I had to invent it, one of the things that I realized real quickly was that, it takes a lot of time and effort to invent or to create something new. And so what that means is I couldn't just magically do it, right? I had to hire people and I had to build this thing. That means I wasn't doing it right there while I was in school. It was going to take a number of years after that in order to finally get this built and into production. The cool thing about it from my standpoint was, since this was going to revolutionize the lives of billions, with a B, billions of people. I mean, think about that. How many ideas do you have that are actually going to revolutionize the lives of billions of people? This was going to save people hundreds of hours of time. It was going to make kids learn more. It was going to make the world so much of a better place, right? The world was going to be way better just because of this invention. And that's so exciting, I mean, seriously, I'm going to change the flipping world. Everybody's going to be better off. Literally everybody. I am going to change the world. The world's going to be better, and I couldn't believe it didn't exist. So, in order to make my invention happen, I had to spend a whole lot of time in these things called libraries. Now, some of you are young enough that you don't even know what a library is, which cracks me up. But some of my college students don't realize that actual libraries in colleges exist. So, I literally had to spend time in a library, and one of the reasons I had to spend time in a library is because of what I told you earlier. The research had stopped in like the 80s, before computers were readily available. All the research texts I was finding, and the research was old, 60s, 70s, 50s. This is where the research is from. And a lot of these resources have not been put into online libraries. So all this information I'm getting, I'm actually pulling out of books the old-fashioned way, sitting there in a library, downloading them, or reading them, scanning the pages, researching them. And the more and more research I did, the more clear and clearer it came. And I became 100% confident that this active word fonts concept would work and that I would be able to pull it off. So therefore, once again, eyes glazed over. I'm like, I'm going to change the world. Everybody's going to be using this. It's the next best thing since sliced bread. Can't believe it doesn't exist already. This is going to be absolutely amazing. I literally thought I'd become a billionaire, if not a trillionaire, off this invention, right? I mean, I was so confident that this was the next big thing. So what is this idea of active word fonts? And the premise is pretty simple, right? So current text is really designed by the individual letter, the individual piece. So if you want a certain T, you design that certain T. If you're trying to make the most readable font, or the easiest to read text, the fastest reading text, then you're trying to create a bunch of individual letters that are the easiest to read. Therefore, when you put them together in a word, then the entire word becomes easier to read. Now, this concept to me sounds like it's from the 1920s, right? I mean, what are we doing? Are we Gutenberg? Are we still using the printing press? And that's the frustrating thing about the idea, is that the only reason anyone would think that way is because of the printing press from like thousands of years ago. I mean, seriously, why would, in the age of having cell phones and computers, why would we think of text as being a single thing that cannot change, cannot move, cannot do anything? You know how much sense that makes? Zero. It makes no sense. Still doesn't make any sense, right? Still the way it works, but... So I'm sitting there saying, okay, when I read a word, I don't read apple, A-P-P-L-E. No, I read the word apple, right? There's so much research out there talking about the way that our eyes perceive words. And if our eyes perceive the word apple instead of the letters A-P-P-L-E, then why the heck would I design a font at the level of an individual letter that nobody in the world uses, right? Nobody reads at the individual letter. Why would I use the individual letter as the basis of my design font, right? And it blew my mind, because the fact of the matter is there's a ton of companies out there that have sold these fonts that are supposed to be the easiest to read for like millions of dollars. They made millions of dollars making these silly fonts that are easiest to read by making this typeset is, it has the right serifs, and so you flow and it connects, and it, seriously, nobody reads the letters. I don't read letters. You don't read letters. If none of us read letters, then why are we spending millions and millions of dollars buying fonts that are designed at the letter level? That makes zero sense to me, right? It seems like a bunch of old people from 1920 are like, hey guys, let's use a printing press. Nobody uses a printing press with opposable type. Nobody uses a printing press anymore, right? Somebody's gonna call me up and say, oh, I do, because I'm into, prehistoric stuff. Whatever, there might be like 3 people. Nobody uses a printing press with opposable type. So I designed this new way to approach text, and this new way to approach text involves designing things at the word level. Makes a lot of sense. Really simple. Works great, right? Everybody's going to use it. Why wouldn't you use it? It's the right way to do things. It's the same level we read. We read at the word level. Let's design at the word level. So I created this new system, and once again, the problem is I had to make it work, because once again, it's one thing to know it works in theory, it's another thing to actually physically make it work. And this is where I had to get a little creative. So at the time, I had been running a development company, building software for airline industries. And what I started doing is realizing I could use these resources, these programmers, when they weren't working on active projects for the airlines industry, to build the software for active word fonts. The funny thing about the whole thing is I tried to explain it to some of them, and they literally did not get it. They're like, it doesn't make sense. So I could not explain to them the software in the way that you typically would when you're trying to get somebody to build something. I couldn't say, here's what the goals are, and therefore make it happen, because they didn't understand the concept of having type that was at the word level instead of the letter level. So what does that mean from my standpoint? Well, it means I had to be a little creative. So instead of telling them that, what they were building, I just gave them really specific instructions. I said, okay, I need you to build A. Then I said, I need you to move these pieces of A and make them different. Oh, and I need you to make these pieces different. And I kept changing pieces over time. And while this seems like a backwards way to develop something, the positive is it actually managed to do what we were trying to do very effectively. So I literally was able to then create this system that worked using developers that didn't comprehend it. And then once it was done and working, then I could actually show it off. And when I show it off to people and they see it, they're like, oh, it makes a lot of sense. It works great, right? I'm reading faster. My life is better. So once again, it worked great, but I had 3 pieces of software I had to make. The first piece is, since none of these text types existed, these active word fonts existed, I had to create a way to design these fonts, right? You had to design these new fonts, these new systems, this new way of dealing with text that doesn't have, that doesn't use a traditional system, because nothing out there exists to make active word fonts. So I had to create a font designer system, right? That's a pretty big undertaking. Then I had to create a way to actually handle the fonts. And that's the second piece. And that means I have to be able to, create a book or create text or something like that using the fonts. And the way that I decided to approach it was I made an add-in to Microsoft Word. That meant that anybody who had Microsoft Word had the ability to convert their text into active word fonts. So once again, I've got the font creator system, the active word fonts creator system, and the way to use active word fonts in your text. So therefore you can convert a book, you can convert a paper, you can convert whatever you want to on it. Pretty cool, right? The third thing I then had to do is actually design the fonts. Now, this to somebody who has no idea how typography works might not seem like a big undertaking. But first of all, let me tell you that creating a normal font or typeset can cost you a massive amount of money. Now I'm creating a new concept that nobody even understands because it doesn't exist yet. And on top of that, it requires at least 7 times the characters that a traditional font set does. So if somebody's going to charge you $100,000 to create a traditional font set, and now all of a sudden you are going to create a one that has 7 times the amount of characters, now all of a sudden you need about $700,000. Did I mention the point that this is when I was still in school and just leaving school, right? So I didn't have a couple $1 million to build this. What does that mean? That means I had to scrape together everything I could. I hired students. I trained them in typography. I set them up with computers and the software in order to do this. I got them actually coding the stuff. I had these employees that were doing this software for the airlines industry. And what did I do? I had them working on these projects on the side. All in all, I spent, instead of about $1 million that it would normally cost to get this far, I only spent about $50,000 to $60,000. Now, $50,000 to $60,000 sounds like a whole lot of money to a 20-something. And let me tell you, it was everything I had, right? I was having to put everything I had to make this happen. But once again, isn't that how entrepreneurship works? Don't you have to put in everything you have in order to make something work? And that's what I did. But I found a way to pull it off. And I got this thing made. I got this thing built. It worked. Life was good. And I said, you know what? Even though it cost me everything I had, this thing's going to make freaking millions, right? Or billions. I mean, it's going to change the world. Everybody's going to use it. It literally changes the world. So once again, once I got this built, I put everything into it. I was pretty excited to get it moving forward, but I had to prove it. So I worked with a professor at Syracuse University to do a research study, and the research study was going to determine, is this new type of text actually better than existing systems, existing software, or existing text? And so we approached two text types that are considered some of the most readable, Calibri and Helvetica. So we created a double-blind study, properly done, well done. I can talk more about the study with you at some point if you'd like to hear it. But I set up this very specific study that involved a bunch of people reading different text samples. Some of the text samples were one, some of the text samples were the other, but some people got them in all different orders. So some people got my special font first, then they got the other ones. Some of them got the other ones, then they got mine. Some of them got a story about one thing in one and a story in something else in the other, and then other ones have it flipped. So once again, I removed all those variables. You could have either story in either typeset. Therefore, I wasn't going to get biased because people liked a certain story. It was easy to retain information about a story, or based in the order that you read them. So we had a bunch of individuals come in, and they were viewed, and they were recorded, and they were videotaped for the purpose of this research study. And what we found was pretty crazy. So from the get-go, it was awesome to see that every single research participant read the active word fonts faster than either Calibri or Helvetica. That is awesome, right? Think about it. I went up against ones that they're familiar with and ones that have already dominated the market, and I smashed them, right? The average was 8% faster reading speeds, okay? The other cool thing is comprehension and retention increased, right? So they're reading faster and retaining more information. I'm sitting there doing a happy dance, like, hey, this is going to be a gold mine, right? This is about the same time that research was coming out about e-readers, talking about how e-readers slows your reading speeds by, about the same percentage. And I'm sitting there thinking, wait, I got a cure for e-readers. You can now read an e-reader faster than a book. You can now read a book even faster than you ever had before. This is going to be life-changing. That was awesome. I was so excited at this point. We had this research study. We had this system. Life was good. One little caveat showed up in a good way, right? And that was that some people had an average of 25% reading speed improvements. And I said, that's really kind of cool. So I contacted those people and found out something really interesting. They had something called dyslexia. So I did a little further research on it, and it looks like reading speeds improved by up to 50%. Retention and comprehension shot up as well for dyslexic individuals using active word fonts. So once again, think about that for a minute. If you have dyslexia and you use active word fonts, you're going to read faster and you're going to retain more information. Is that cool? I think that's a huge deal, right? That's icing on the cake. Every single person that we researched, everybody is reading this thing faster. Everybody is retaining more information. Everybody, their position was more upright. They were more comfortable reading. It was clearly everything was aligning with this being, life-changingly awesome. Then I find out dyslexic students are reading 25 to 50% faster, retaining more information. I mean, think about how much that's going to change the lives of dyslexics. Now all of a sudden they can read more, they can stay up in school better, they can succeed easier. I mean, this is just awesome. It's better for everybody. Life is fantastic for everybody. Clearly, this is going to be a life-changing product. So I take my research and I take the finished product and I do what any logical person would do today, and I say, all right, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to package this thing up and I'm going to send it out to newspapers, and they're going to pick this up and they're going to publish the next greatest thing, and I'm going to change the world. I sent it out to a whole bunch of newspapers, and only one of them picked it up, and that was the Cincinnati Business Journals. So thank you guys very much. And they picked it up, but even there, it wasn't about how cool the technology. It was pretty much about how some college student created an invention, which is cool. I'm not here to downplay it, but once again, I was thinking everybody. I was like, newspapers are gonna be like, hey, readers are gonna love this. They're gonna read more. They're gonna retain more. My newspaper's gonna be better, But that's not quite the way the cookie crumbled. So unfortunately, from that regard, I didn't get a big push. I put together these press kits. I put together, software and CDs and cards and packets and all this stuff, mailed them out to all these people. Then I said, okay, well, I gave it a good shot there. Now I'm going to go after the companies. Do you know how hard it is to contact a company like Adobe, Microsoft, or Google? I mean, seriously, it's incredibly challenging. So I attack my network, and I try to find anyone I know that could be connected to those companies. And because as many of us will recognize, often when we can attack our networks, that's one of the most effective ways to get inroads with a product or with a company. So I thought, I'm going to go approach my networks, and hopefully one of my networks is going to have a great contact, and they're going to get me in with one of these companies. None of them worked out. Then I decided, okay, I'm going to send stuff to these companies just, to whatever mailing addresses I can find. Never heard back from any of them. Oh, I'm going to send this to their, email, their websites. Never got a hold of any of them. The only one I was able to find anything legitimate to, formally submit was to Google. But I was excited. I said, you know what? When Google sees this, they're going to say, wow, this is life-changing. All of Google products are going to be better. Android phones are going to be better. Our websites are going to be better. We're going to change the world with this. I figured Google would jump on top of it and be ready to work with me. And, I submitted it to Google, and what I got back? Nothing but I either got a not interested or a, just kind of like a nothing response. So once again, here I hear that something that's going to change the world, literally a life-changing thing. Everybody was going to read faster. Everyone was going to read better. Dyslexics were going to have an easier life. This is going to be better for everybody. And you know what happened to that? Nothing. I wasn't able to move it to any company. So I figured, hey, I'll try to move it myself. Put it on my website, made it real cheap. Nobody bought it. Not literally nobody. Like, I didn't sell a single copy. So then I decided, hey, I'm going to go out and work with some groups, dyslexia groups, special ed groups. And I talked to them, and they were somewhat interested, specifically in that dyslexia niche. And so I've actually created a bunch of documents and papers and books and stuff like that I've converted in active word fonts to help dyslexic kids. And that's cool. I'm glad to help out. But the return on these things, how much money I made off them? Zero. I haven't gotten anything from any of these. So here's a great example where I literally created an amazing product, in my opinion. It's still amazing. I still think it's amazing. I patented the thing. I have a U.S. patent for the product. I, send it out to all the big companies. I tried to pitch it online. I sent it to all the newspapers. I did everything I thought you were supposed to do, and you know what came out of it? Nothing. And so it's a big failure because at a very, very important point in my life, a point where just putting money in a mutual fund would have, had huge futuristic benefits. And instead, I created this amazing system, couldn't sell it, right? Couldn't move it, which talks about the importance of being a salesperson, right? Sales training, important, learn to sell if you can't right now. Nothing. Right? I lost all that money. I don't get any returns off of it. I still have a patent for it, but it's, like 6 or 8 years out now. So I don't think I'll ever be able to do anything with it, although I do want to publish some books with it, personal books, just because I think it's so cool. But it kind of makes me sad, not just because I didn't make money off of it, but because I actually know I built something that's going to make the world a better place. And yet I can't get people to use it. And what does that mean? Once again, it tells you that you can create the coolest thing in the world, but if you can't get people using it, if you can't get the right market for it, if you can't find the users for it, you're not going to change the world. It's not going to make a difference. And that's really sad. But that's also one of the reasons why I got so excited and so connected to business. Because I realized that if you can't create a business around a great invention, it's not going to get out there. How many wonderful inventions are there out there which nobody knows about because there's no way to turn it into a business, no way to get the word out? And I'm guessing there's tons. I'm guessing there's probably 10 times as many awesome products out there that no one knows about than there are awesome products that people do know about. And that's kind of the unfortunate takeaway from all this, is that if you don't have a market in mind and you don't know how to reach the market and there's not a specific market need, the coolest invention in the world is not going anywhere. You're not going to do anything with that cool invention. And this is a great example where, there's no market out there begging for it. Would it help Google? Yes. Would it help Adobe? Yes. Would it help Microsoft? Yes. Would it help every publishing company out there? Yes. But none of them are looking because there's not a competitive area of concern right now. And because it's not a competitive area of concern, there's no market for it. And no market for it means there's no money in it, which is very, very depressing, right? So once again, that was my biggest failure ever. I lost massive amounts of money early in my life when that money would have been very valuable. Really set me back, derailed me from an entrepreneurial future in many cases. And who knows what's going to happen with it in the future. I certainly learned from it. I learned a lot. Hopefully you can also learn a lot from it as well. So thanks for listening about that. Last thing I want to talk about before is I recently finished the book, The Power of Habit. And it was a book that I actually fully recommend. I will be posting on a review of it on MillionaireWho.com if you would like to read a little bit more. But it was really a book that made me think differently. The interesting thing, though, is my takeaways from it were totally different from the takeaways of any other review I read. It was talking about how habits form, why habits are important, and how you can do the same things in organizations and similar. It was definitely an academic level review, something you can really learn from, not just a blah, blah, blah conversation like so many books are. But really, the things I took away from it were oddly quite different from others. So once again, I urge you, if you're looking for a book to read, go pick up The Power of Habit. It's a good one. Definitely worth your time. And then the last few books I talked about were kind of, if you want, you can pick them up, but you don't have to. This is one you definitely do want to pick up. All right. Now, thanks again for joining me today. Hope you learned something. Now go out there, and unlike me when I created this active word fonts business, go out there and make the impossible happen.
It's the morning drive.